just keep doing anything. You do occasionally write a decent one, I occasionally write a decent poem. But I love poetry. When I was about 12, I won the school English competition, the school English prize. And this was incredibly exciting for me because you got a book. And they came over to me and they said, you can pick your book, what book do you want? Now the book that I actually really wanted when I was 12 was The Return of the King. Because all they had, which is the last part of Lord of the Rings, because all they had in the school library were the first two books. And I was dying to know how it ended. I read those first two books over and over and over again. I knew it had to end somehow. So I asked for The Return of the King. But I wound up, because I got the English prize and I got some other prize, like the speaking prize. I got an extra book, which I hadn't asked for, and it was just some giant book of 20th century poetry. And because I'd been given it, and because I was the kind of kid who, if he was confronted with a book, would simply read it. That was what I did. You know, you see all these studies about how to get reluctant readers to read. Nobody ever talks about the kids who just want a book. And the ones that you have to pry away from books to get to real life. The ones who, in my case, I would get frisked by my parents before family events. And the book would be removed. I wish I could lie and say, you know, the obvious book would be removed, but, you know, a secret book. But I didn't. But most places you went, there was something to read, and I could always wind up sitting under the table reading something. So that book of poetry was given to me, and I read it, and fell in love with the poetry of Robert Graves, fell in love with the poetry of E. Cummings, really liked T.S. Eliot, just liked the way the words worked. So I wound up discovering the joys of poetry. And poetry became hugely important to me when I was writing Sandman, because I discovered that when you're constructing comics, particularly a comic like Sandman, you're using a lot of the same engines that you're using in poetry. You wind up, everything is about coiling the words incredibly tightly. And because, at least for me, I have a theory that comics are things that on some level you hear. That word balloons have the idea of word balloons, the idea of sound effects. They're things that on some level are heard, as well as going in through the eye. I try, if I could, to use the economies of poetry. And poetry has a wonderful facility for being able to squeeze huge concepts and huge ideas into these small words, coiling them up like springs. And I would try and do that. I write poetry. I still write poetry. It tends to have more narrative than it should. I think it's because I'm a storyteller, and I wind up telling stories whatever I do. And I always feel that good poems shouldn't tell stories. Good poems should just illuminate a moment or an emotion or an idea. But they shouldn't necessarily have beginnings and ends. And mine always do. Or almost always. There's talk at HarperCollins of collecting my poetry, which might actually be a blessing, particularly for those people who, in the short story collections, grumble about the poems. And those are the people to whom I actually occasionally have to explain that they are not paying any more for the book. Because of the poems. The poems are free. They actually like the introduction, they come completely free with it.